Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we begin today, I think it's important that we contemplate events in the United States over the weekend, as we all saw that former President Donald Trump at a rally uh, endured an assassination attempt. Apparently, he was not hit by an actual bullet. The bullet hit the teleprompter, and a shard of glass hit his right ear, and he went down and then came back up, fist in the air, saying, "Fight, fight, fight." And that was an iconic moment, I think, for the election. The Republican National Convention starts today. Apparently, he's going to be announcing his vice presidential running mate. And so I thought we should be thinking about the surreal nature of what is happening now, not only in the United States, but around the world. And not only is Trump now in a different position than he was before the rally, President Biden continues to double down, saying that he started this fight and he's going to finish this fight, and he beat Trump once, he can beat him again, when it's absolutely clear to everybody that he is no longer mentally capable of such a contest and such a process as a presidential election. The United States has also announced that it will be deploying intermediate nuclear missiles in Germany. These are Tomahawk cruise missiles. And it's important for us to all note that back in the early 1980s, when President Reagan wanted to deploy cruise missiles in Europe, there was such a massive outcry that the missiles were stopped, along with the Pershing II missiles. And this time, there's not even a public debate. And the reason why they were stopped 40 years ago was because they basically tip the probability of nuclear exchange into an absurdity, because intermediate nuclear weapons in Europe means that they can hit Moscow or various Russian strategic sites within 60 seconds, 90 seconds, and therefore there's no possibility of any human functioning or consideration in the response. Gaza, we're seeing massive killings by the Israelis as they continue to try to find Hamas, so far unsuccessfully. 70, 80 people being killed now at one time. And the media notes, but doesn't basically respond. We're in an orgy of violence. We're in a period of complete refusal to recognize reality, a refusal that escalates our aggressiveness and brings us closer to our doom. Why is this happening? Why are people in high power caught up in the frenzy of aggression and recalcitrance and not paying attention to their own strategic betterment, let alone the public good? As I've been reflecting upon this I've been drawn more and more to astrology because it's astrology, which is not only the most ancient science, but the one with the most profound insight into how human beings are behaving and the attitudes that are shaping that behavior. And I'm not an astrologer by profession, but I follow astrology, both in terms of my own chart, but also in terms of world events. And there are two aspects of astrology that I think are very important for us all to note as we seek to explain and understand the convulsion of aggression that is now consuming our world. And aggression in a particular kind of explosive, chaotic way. And that is because Mars and Uranus are now conjunct in the heavens. Mars is the god of war. Uranus is the god of revolution, Promethean upheavals of culture and ideology and systems. So when you combine aggressiveness and combat with an energy that is explosive, you get what's happening in the world today. Just look at the French election. Out of nowhere, President Macron of France decides he's going to have a snap election. And the net of that was a diminution of his own power. Rishi Sunak did that in Great Britain, and he was wiped out. So two examples of leaders who convulsed into something that was against their own self-interest. That's Mars-Uranus conjunct. President Biden, clear to everybody that he's not capable of being president of the United States anymore, let alone running for president. And yet he doubles down. And then Trump endures an assassination attempt and comes out with his fist in the air in an iconic gesture of defiance. You know, it's arguable that Trump just won the election because there is no way the disorganized Democrats can even begin to take on the energy that is now going to animate the Republican Party and the conservative elements of the United States polity. So we are in a situation of upheaval. And the second astrological fact that we all need to take in is the fact that Pluto, the god of Hades, the god of destruction, the god of demise, this Dionysian eruption of the spirit, but in a destructive way, that the United States will be experiencing its Pluto return this November. And that's the most powerful astrological reality going on, I think, in the world today and in the United States. So that where Pluto was on July 4th, 1776, 248 years later, that's where Pluto is. And it's going to happen coinciding with the US election. So you have the Mars-Uranus conjunction happening now, convulsing global politics, increasing danger. sabotaging coherence. And when we go to an election, Pluto is going to have its apogee influence over the United States. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary what's happening in our time. And simultaneously with this, the moon, the sun cycle is reaching its apogee in late 2024, going into 2025. So as you may know from previous sessions on Humanity Rising, as the sun, 11-year sun cycle, as it reaches its apogee and the sun flares are pulsing out of the sun toward the Earth and the other planets, there's more aggression, there's more creativity, there's more upheaval, and all that is peaking at this moment in time. So that's our context. That's what's happening in the heavens. And that's why human behavior is entering what I can only call a surreal moment, where we're just watching unfolding events that are going to get more complicated, more centrifugal in their forces, till even now, it's hard to even hold the totality of what's going on. And as people are unable to hold that totality, they contract. They become more fearful. And that is what empowers the tyrant. Because what's at stake for the United States if Trump wins is, with almost 100% certainty, the demise of the republic. Because he has made it clear what he intends to do. And the Supreme Court has just stated that as president, he has complete immunity. So we're watching the demise of a democratic republic that has stood for 248 years for democracy itself, as the American experiment teeters on the precipice of an abyss of its own making, because it's surrendered itself to the military-industrial complex, against which President Eisenhower warned in the 1960s, but that the world and the United States and the leadership of the United States and the people of the United States didn't pay attention. And now it's consuming us. And the astrological framework and context is enhancing the very forces that we ourselves unleashed upon ourselves many, many decades ago. And how we, communities of goodwill, navigate through what's coming is a real question that we should all ponder individually as communities. What is it in this time of escalating chaos that can give us more coherence? Because if we can gather within ourselves as much coherence internally as we're experiencing chaos externally, we're going to be able to keep the chaos outside of our own psyches. That's critical. That's critical. We have to love one another. We have to hold hands. We have to breathe. We have to build our coherence to endure the coming storm. So thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Humanity Rising. We always appreciate clarity of this community and the support of this community. We'll be talking more about these matters in the coming months. Now we want to shift to some of the subjects we were talking about last week, and ponder the question, what's a galactic framework that we can start to think about as we hold these various pieces, these contradictory pieces that are happening in our world, that are threatening our world, but somehow there's a larger context within which we can find the coherence that we need. That's very important. So it's my pleasure to introduce someone I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, Russ Dondo. At one level, he is an investor and an entrepreneur who helps principally medical companies grow and resource themselves. At another level, he's a philosopher and considers deeply the ultimate nature of reality. And we've had a number of conversations where he's explained his philosophical views and his cosmological understanding. So we've invited him here as one of our Humanity Rising community to share his perspective. So, Russ, welcome to Humanity Rising. And Russ is going to make some opening remarks, and you can say a little bit more about your background, Russ, if you would like. And Russ has a few slides he's going to show, and then we're going to dive in to a dialogue on the galactic nature of things. So, Russ, over to you.
No, thanks, Jim. Thank you. It's good to be here again. I mean, really, everything that you said, in your preamble was they're all issues that could be unpacked and talked about really in light of this galactic belief system. And one of the things I didn't want to fail to point out is there's when I talk amongst friends and there's always this reticence to believe in astrology. And my response is this, that the human eye, we know that the human eye can detect a single photon. So my point to them is that if the human eye can detect a single photon, how can the other cells in the body, especially those that are in a process of great formation, how are they affected by the particle form of gravity, the gravitons? And I would suggest that if the body's sensitive enough for one, it's sensitive enough for all of those. Yeah, and you're on mute, but that's okay.
Just saying, totally.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so a little bit of background, and then I just want to tell you what at the very least I hope we can do here today. So I was raised Catholic, and like so many others of us, that was really a very anthropomorphic view of the holy. I remember as a boy really seriously pondering if Jesus was the one with the dark beard, then for sure God had to have a white beard. Yeah, it was really the image. And in fact, and maybe that came from Michelangelo, right? And the Sistine Chapel, because God's there creating man. If you look at God, he's got kind of a whitish beard, right? And hair. And so anyway, I've always had that kind of curiosity, and fortunately, I was able to get into a form of work where I was able to deploy that curiosity in my work with researchers and scientists and clinicians whenever they would have some kind of discovery or innovation. When it was required, I was able to tease those ideas apart and better understand them and be able to portray them in a way that the funding parties that are required to drive something forward out to the world, that the funding parties could understand. So one of the things that I began back in probably the early 2000s, I began taking a deep dive throughout theoretical physics, as well as the world's religions and the world's mystic traditions, and even co-authored a book that I'm not recommending anyone buy, but it's called The Believer's Brain. It's about neurology and our how we practice religiosity and also our spiritual practices. And I may touch on something with that later, but if we get to it. But I think what happened is back in the 90s, there's a theoretical physicist named Brian Greene. Probably many, if not all of you have heard of him, but I think his book was called The Elegant Universe, and it was all about string theory. And I was, for some reason, really drawn to string theory. It just sounded too weird to me. So I read the book and had more questions. And I'm not going to I'm gonna save this for a few minutes from now, what came to me out of reading that book, because I'm going to go into some other things first of all. But and that is this. So let's go down this road, and then I may put up some slides here in just a minute. But by the way, I don't want to make this a whole presentation of slides. I'd like to, be talking more than reading through slides. It is clear to me, and I know that, you all are going to say that you've heard this before and you understand it. And I think that's an important position to take. But it's this, that I've come to the understanding that science, in particular, what we're talking about is theoretical physics. Science and the world's religions are essentially saying the same thing, but they're using two different languages. And the languages are so different, and the thinking behind those languages is so different. It looks like that these two are not united in any way. And so what I would hope to be able to do here is to present some of the science in a way that begins to make more clear the source of everything and how we're a part of that. And so I think that as I do this, I'm going to share the screen. As I do this, it's very important to keep something else in mind, and that is that we are so stuck in a anthropomorphic belief system that connotes the attributes and the characteristics of humanity to everything that is spiritual and unseen. And I would say that that we need that to help us understand, but we can't get stuck on that. And when we get stuck on it, we end up with the more stricter views of religions. I think that, we've got to move beyond the anthropomorphic terms, and we've got to expand how we see those terms from religion, just as we have to do them in science. So I think, from that galactic perspective and kind of the things that Jim was talking about, we have to understand that right now, in us and all around us, are 6 or more hidden dimensions that we cannot perceive. And in the same way that if it's daylight where you're at right now, if you look outside, you cannot see the stars, but the stars are still there. The reason we can't see them is because we have a very limited visual spectrum. Now, if we could see infrared and ultraviolet on the other end, we would be able to see the stars during the daytime. But my point is that there's a presence around us and in us and through us our 5 senses just can't pick up. And I think one of the other things that I think is a mistake is there's this discussion about multiple universes going on, and I think that I think that people get hung up on, okay, well, I'm here in this one, And then in another one, I'm doing something else, right? I don't think that the science necessarily supports that. And I don't think that religion generally supports that. Instead, I would say that um, the hidden universe that we can't see is a real-time projection into our real-time world. So our three dimensions are a real-time reflection of all of this stuff that we can't see. And you've probably heard this before as well, that our three dimensions could be likened to a holographic projection. And I think that if you look at the folks that have also promulgated this, I mean, they're, David Bohm and Stephen Hawking and Larry Dossey, many years ago in his book, Space, Time, and Medicine, talked about the holographic universe idea. So, but but in our case, it's more than a hologram in that we have a physical being. We have a three-dimensional universe, three-dimensional life that we live and breathe in. And it's not a two-dimensional image that appears three-dimensional. I'm going to skip through this, but this is just how a hologram works. It essentially takes a light beam and splits it and reflects off an object, and then there's a photographic plate where they all come together and it creates an image. It's not a big deal, but here is something that is interesting, and many of you may know this, that no matter how small you dissect a hologram, the whole is contained in every part. Pretty fascinating. So there's all kinds of stuff, on the internet about the holographic universe. You have all these cool pictures. And this one is interesting. Is the universe just are we just a hologram? And I say just a hologram. We're pretty spectacular three-dimensional hologram is how I would say it. And so none of this is intended to imply that the three dimensions are less real. In fact, I think that sometimes we get carried away thinking that the ethereal is more real than our three dimensions. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I believe that, this is very real where we're at right now. So there's an example here that I want to go to, and it's this one to help explain this. So these hidden dimensions that would project as everything in our three dimensions may be analogous to a flashlight that shines on a wall, where in the flashlight, the light coming out of the flashlight is the source, and that which is on the wall would be analogous to everything in our three dimensions. And hopefully that's something that makes sense. But let's go. Let me see if I can see the screen. Okay, so now what could be the basis for these hidden dimensions and whatever exists in hidden dimensions? And I call upon string theory. And string theory essentially says that there are these vibrating filaments vibrating at the Planck scale. And I believe the Planck scale it's a number no one has to remember, but it's 1.6 times 10 to the minus 35th centimeters. So you have these little vibrating filaments, and they're often referred to as Calabi-Yau manifolds or loops, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute. And that the particular way in which these things fold and join and vibrate projects into our universe as everything we see. So here's a illustration of one of these Calabi-Yau shapes, and so the way this works is that we have in our three dimensions what are known as fundamental particles, things that can't be further subdivided. And for example, with matter, we have quarks. And so it may be up to, yeah, well, it used to be an up quark and a down quark would give rise to a proton. So the proton was not fundamental, but the quarks that comprise it are. So the way string theory works is that these shapes project into our three dimensions as the fundamental particles. So the up quark and down quark would have their own particular patterns. It's the size of it. So yeah, here's an example. So this is how small these shapes are. So if you scale up an atom to become the size of the Earth, and the Planck scales with it, then the Planck scale would be less than the pin of a head. So that's pretty small. Here's another example, another rendering of the Calabi-Yau shape. And so this is the things that I was telling you about how they project as the fundamental particles. Let's move through that. Okay. So if you think about it, if you think about these shapes projecting as fundamental particles, by the time you get to something as complex as a human, you have an infinite number of layers of these Calabi-Yau manifolds enabling something as complex as a human, or even as a human brain. Okay, so what I wanted to make a point of here is there's been a lot of discussions about archetypes. And if you follow what I've been saying about string theory, that you have these particular patterns that give rise to something in our three dimensions. Then if you have, for example, an atom of hydrogen near the beginning of the universe, and you have an atom of hydrogen now, those vibrating patterns in the hidden dimensions are going to be exactly the same. They would be able to repeat themselves, they would carry forward. And so that is, for me, a basis of archetypes. When you have this underlying pattern, and it now remember, these underlying patterns give rise to everything, which would include our very thoughts and feelings and emotions, which gives rise to those, when we embody archetypal patterns of behavior, those archetypal patterns would be that flashlight shining as us. So let me see what else I have here. So here's a question for everyone, and maybe you've already gathered this, but what if there was no disconnection between these Calabi-Yau shapes, even as they changed form? And getting back to Brian Greene's book, I asked myself the question, well, if we're comprised in these hidden dimensions of all these vibrating patterns, when I walk around, and are my vibrating patterns smashing into the vibrating patterns that give rise to air? I mean, how does that happen? Do they get pushed aside? Or do we move along them? Do we move along them so that every Planck scale, everything is being discreated and recreated? And so I think that when we think about the connection between all things, it serves us to consider that these vibrating filaments of string theory are all connected. There's no separation between them. And when you appear as that projection and I appear as a projection, we're all from and of that same source, which is in these hidden dimensions. So I hope right there that even saying that is, I mean, I don't know if that's something others have considered. I haven't heard anyone say that those patterns, those vibrating filaments are the source of oneness. But hopefully that is something that does make sense. So another point I want to make is that, there's been a lot of discussion on Humanity Rising about fractals. And if we have time, we can get into the potential source of that. But if you look at the Colubi-Yaw shapes, and then you look at the human brain, it's almost as if the human brain is a fractal of these. Is it? I don't know. But when you look at the structure of the universe, the large scale structure of the universe, this is a phenomenal rendering. These astrophysicists are suggesting that these are the largest structures in the cosmos. And if you look at that, what looks like a nerve cord in the center, those are galaxies all spinning together and going to this agglomeration point. And then if you look at this, this was from the Cleveland Clinic, University of Oregon, where they did this depiction of neurons in the brain, and very much like the large scale structure of the universe. Is the brain a fractal of the universe? Here's another large scale structure of the universe. And there's another depiction of the brain, very similar. So, Jim, with that, is there anything that I need to answer or have any interaction with at this point? All right. Okay, so let's look at this next question, because this is something that we hear all the time. And there's this general concept that we fall into where the three dimensions is the universe. It's everything. And as I said from the beginning, I suggest that it's not everything. And what certainly could have existed before our physical universe, before the Big Bang, were the hidden dimensions. Now, if you bring in, if you bring in the Kabbalah, if you bring in some of the Vedas, the Vedic literature, even some of perhaps Sufism, there's this in the Kabbalah, it's this infinite nothingness that exists all the time, known as the Ein Sof. And to me, it's conceivable that what religion is talking about here is the same thing as these hidden dimensions in the form of pure awareness. So pure awareness is like seems to be a general understanding of what this infinite nothingness is across, a number of religions, this infinite nothingness. What happens is that gets confused with the God of the Bible, which, is judgmental, gets angry, and then expresses love. And so, you start running into these definitions of God, actually anthropomorphizing, God a little bit. And so let's look at this next one.
Russ, I'm here.
Okay, Jim, thanks. Yeah. So was there, Jim, because I spent a lot of time talking about that and going through the slides more than I wanted to, but was there anything that I needed to stop on?
No, I think you covered it. I have a number of comments that I would make, but if you want to continue your presentation, please do.
Yeah, so I think the question is when is something still nothing, right? So if nothing existed before the three-dimensional universe, but yet there was something in the hidden dimensions, isn't nothing still something? And I think the information points to a yes on that. Okay. So how do we make sense out of this oneness appearing as everything? Yeah. So if we have this oneness appearing as everything, the analogy that seems to make sense to me, and I think maybe many of you can come up with your own analogies that maybe make more sense to you. But think about this: how we have the sunlight, the purest light we know, the whitest light that we know, shines through the atmosphere, through the water molecules, and we get all the colors of the rainbow. And I would suggest that the archetypal patterns are simply in a way that's analogous with a rainbow, taking that infinite nothingness, that infinite awareness or pure awareness, and simply shaping it according to those particular archetypal patterns. So, Jim, I'll stop there. If you have any questions at this point.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, thank you. And I love the numbers associated with these little Planck integers, because that number is so vast. It means that they are so small. And I would just wanted to bring in what the great cosmologist and physicist Nassim Haramein says about them, in addition to the points that you were making. What he asserts is that these little Planck units, shall we call them, are not only infinitesimally small, but they're going in and out of reality gazillions of times a second, so that the universe is both appearing and disappearing alternately, sort of like the slides of a movie. We have a sense that there's a continual flow as we watch a movie, but actually they're in units, and the units disappear and appear. They're always spinning in a spiral, and the connection between them is the information of what everything is doing as it's appearing and disappearing virtually simultaneously. And in Nassim's understanding, that's what holds the whole thing together. That they have a very specific appearance and disappearance, spinning, and it's all information. And that's why, the cough of a sparrow is heard in the farthest galaxy. And and how the space, the part that we don't see and the part that we do see, holds together as a singularity. So anyway, I wanted to bring that in from Nassim and have you comment on anything that you would like to comment about that, because I think your intuition is absolutely right. That's what holds the whole thing together.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm glad to hear, because when I read the book, Brian Greene's book, and I thought, well, what is he? First of all, he's a scientist, so he doesn't want to be ostracized. He couldn't venture. He didn't say anything about a connection between anything, and he didn't say anything about how objects in our three dimensions, what's their relationship with the strings in terms of the movement. So as you were talking, and I'm talking now, as I move my hand in front of the camera, what I believe Nassim is saying, which is the same thing that I'm saying, is at the Planck scale, as I move my hand, it's discreating and recreating
Yeah,
at a Planck scale. And so I'm never going to notice that. It's going to look like pure solid motion to me.
exactly. Exactly.
But in actuality, it's a constant discreation and recreation. And be clear that everything is in motion all the time. I could be strapped to this chair. The planet is moving on its on its axis. It's moving around the sun. The solar system is spinning. The galaxy is spinning. And as I showed in that large scale structure of the universe, they're depicting all these galaxies moving together to these agglomeration points. So everything's moving. That means that everything in our three dimensions would be discreating and recreating every three dimensions.
That's
And
exactly right. And it's all moving in a spiral. That's what Nassim has observed about these Planck units is they're all moving in a spiral, and it's all information. That's arithmetic equations and geometric shapes, all the way up, all the way down, coming in and
yeah,
out of reality in one big information system.
yeah. So, when I talked in the beginning about science and religion speaking two very different languages, I didn't make clear that I'm not going to speak the language of science. I'm going to speak the language of science translated. Because the language of science, as you know from studying Nassim, is all maths, right? That's how they look at everything from a mathematical perspective. I'm simply taking an English translation of some of the basic fundamentals that I've been talking about here and using that. So there was the Guardians of the Galaxy. I think it was the last one where, and I'm just not remembering names of the characters, but where this main powerful ruler who is not a good guy. Remember, for those who saw it, all these people just begin disappearing, just gone. And well, it made sense to me that I could see that he had this in this movie. He had this ability to control the discreation, recreation, and he let them all discreate, and there was no recreation. Now, there are some belief systems. Martin Prechtel, who some of you may know, in a one-on-one conversation with me, told me that there's a net that holds the universe together, which again ties into everything that we've discussed. But then he's also written a lot about that if we don't feed the universe with our words of beauty, the universe can collapse. So it's something worth thinking about. What is it that keeps the universe in the recreation mode and not just discreation in the end of these three dimensions as we know it? What keeps it in place? And one of the things that I wanted to bring up, but there's a lot of stuff to unpack for this subject, but that is of free will. If it is true that we're discreating and recreating every Planck scale, that means, does that mean that our free will has the ability to alter that discreation, recreation? I mean, it obviously does in the most basic things. I mean, I can use my free will to decide to just get off this call right now if I wanted to, right? And that would change. I would be discreating and recreating in a way that I determined myself to be. So if it's true that this is the case, and we know that we're in the situation that we are in, politically and across in this country and across the planet, what is the capability of free will? But I think, and I'm really bringing in a little bit more of a religious sense here, is especially in the Kabbalah. Rabbi David Cooper has really been my primary teacher in the Kabbalah. Talks about free will is empowered when it's held against the nothingness, the infinite nothingness. And so that free will gets to act maybe like a bit of a prism for all of that power that keeps the universe in a recreation, discreation mode. And so maybe there's nothing more powerful than what we do with our free will and do it in the right way. So, I
Again,
mean, this opens up lots of conversations like, okay, so then, um, if we have these if everything is connected, if these hidden dimensions are the source of everything, can we see how, from an Earth religion perspective, how the who Jesus could have been and who other illuminated people could have been, and if you can all think about it, but what it seems to me is they were aware of that connection between all things. They were aware of it. It was primary in them, and they were able to apply their free will to that and make good things happen. So,
let me just
uh,
interject here, Ross, because I think, again, going back to Nassim is very specific. He says that, this conversation is being drawn into the cosmic memory now. Every time the Planck scales, those little Planck units, go from the visible to the invisible, they're taking the information from the visible into the Akashic field. So not only every choice we make, every aspect of existence is feeding information all the time into the whole. It's not just a matter of free will. What your stomach is doing right now, what the glaciers up in the Arctic are doing right now. Every time, the trillions of times a second that the Planck units go from the visible to the invisible, they're feeding whatever happened in that split second in the visible into the Akashic field. And that is the information that holds the whole thing together. We have this notion of free will as a kind of a moral, sort of the tip of the iceberg. But everything in our physiology, everything that's going on in the air right now, everything that the birds are doing out there is all being fed into the Akashic field. And that's how the universe understands the totality of what's going on. It's not just my choice of whether I'm going to have toast for breakfast or an egg for breakfast. That's also true. But the free will, the movement of the visible back into the invisible, is at the level of complete minutiae.
can you see it as a two-way street?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then when it goes back from the invisible to the visible, the total information of the Akashic field is fed then into every little Planck scale, every cell, every organ, every galaxy that there is. And that's how and why the whole thing can always hold together, because the whole thing knows everything all the time.
So the Star of David is one way to look at it as, and this is something we've
Yeah,
all heard, that as above, so below, and then the Star of David is
inside and outside.
as
Oh,
below, so above.
that's right. And the breakthrough of the physicists like Nassim is to identify these Planck units, these Planck scale uh, integers, as the principal mechanism by which the whole thing happens. Now, they may find eventually things within the Planck scales that are governing the Plancks, but at this level. But this leads me to another major issue that I'd like to have you comment on. And that is that I think it's really important when we talk about religion and science basically saying the same thing, that we need to bear in mind that we're talking from a very Western Judeo-Christian perspective. The reality is that the indigenous people, for example, Andrew Bailey put in the chat a few minutes ago that the pygmies of the Kalahari talk about this as the great dance. The Taoists, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the indigenous peoples, they've known what you're talking about and what Nassim is talking about for thousands of years. And Fritjof Capra wrote a book in the 1970s, it's like 50 years ago, called The Tao of Physics, where he said, everything that the modern cosmologists are talking about have been known by the ancient mystery traditions. The only people who don't know it are the Judeo-Christians and the Western civilization that has come out of Judeo-Christianity and developed this scientific reductionist notion of science. And that's why in the Judeo-Christian tradition, particularly the Christian tradition, they were burning scientists at the stake, like Galileo and Bruno and dozens of other scientists were either exiled or silenced or burnt at the stake because the religion developed in the West based on a metaphysic of dualism never got the totality of what was going on. So when we talk about religion and science, it's really important as Westerners for us to understand that we're the only ones out of the conversation. We're beginning to enter the conversation because religion as Judeo-Christian orthodoxy, particularly Christian orthodoxy, is breaking down as cosmology and science are beginning to understand the true nature of things. But I think it's really important for us to just take in that the indigenous people and the Asian religions have known this all along. It's just been the West and the Christians mostly that have been out of the conversation. And anyway, but I just wanted to bring that in as a bit of a perspective, so we take in, and I would refer to everybody who wants to learn more is to read Fritjof Capra's book, The Tao of Physics, because he says the Tao, the ancient symbol of the Tao, is what modern physics is now describing.
I think that, yeah, and no argument there. I think that, in fact, I've got a couple slides to that point that I'm going to share in just a moment here. But I think to that point, it seems to me, and I could be off base on this, but it seems to me if there's got to be, there's this whole, I don't even want to get into it, but now Trump is saying that he's changed his speech at the Republican committee to be about unifying the country, keeping everyone together. I'm just like, so there's this need to unify, right? And we have the religions that, are looking at the literal interpretation and staying there, right? And then we have science staying within the boundaries and not making those extrapolations like in Brian Greene's book. He doesn't, mention the points that I raised. So to me, it seems that we've got to get those plausible explanations to the people that are very literal so that they can see it's just a few more steps or another step to understand that what they're saying is correct. It just doesn't go far enough. And so I'm thinking that science is going to be an assistant, a form of assistance to that.
And another thing that's breaking down is this notion of the Big Bang. That's also a relic of this Judeo-Christian notion of creation, that somehow it got started by this God external to creation. And one of the things that the James Webb telescope and other of these probes out there, they're finding galaxies much older than 13.8 billion years, that they're tens of billions of years older than our little notion of the Big Bang. So what's beginning to dawn on even the cosmologists is that, again, the Hindus and the Buddhists and the indigenous people have been saying for thousands of years that it's eternal, that there is no Big Bang, that the Big Bang was started by something else. And even if we had a Big Bang in our little quadrant of the galaxy, the cosmos itself, the totality, has been going on essentially forever because consciousness is forever.
So
And
I would take exception to that, and I would say that when religions talk about it going on forever, I would suggest that that's the hidden dimensions prior to the three dimensions being formed. Now, certainly there are a lot of theoretical physicists who believe that the universe, and even in Kabbalah, that the universe is this is one of many universes that we're in that have been formed and gone, right?
right,
That in when you read Martin Rees's book, Just 6 Points, he talks about, I think it's just 6 points. He talks about those physical principles that had to be in place in order for us to have this universe. They were just six that if they were off by the slightest amount, we would not have this universe that we have. And so there could have been any number of universes that just didn't
exactly,
have what this one had. So,
exactly.
but again, I think that we can't be stuck in our three dimensions. And when it comes to that galactic perspective, for non-human intelligences that are going to have their different, they're not going to have the Bible. They're not going to have, the King James Bible on their planet, but they can certainly be very tuned in to this whole interconnection, to the creation, discreation, and recreation of everything, and be in awe of it, be in total awe of it. And that awe for that is the same reverence that in religion we hold for what we believe is the holy. We just need to bring them together. So, let me just show you this because you were talking about, for example, the native peoples and about having these beliefs. So let me find this because I've got this kind of a graphic slide here. So, think about this for a moment. That
I don't see the slide.
I don't have it up yet because I got to say something here. So, when at the let's go with my contention. I know this isn't yours, but let's go with my contention that prior to the three-dimensional universe being formed, the infinite awareness was in pure light of awareness, was and is these hidden dimensions. In order, from a more scientific perspective, in order to enable a three-dimensional universe with energy and matter, you have to have the ability to receive that. I mean, if you stick something out there, it's going to be received. And on and I'm going to show you here how and this is not going to be a surprise to you or anyone, but here's how this was depicted. It's graphic, but it gets the point across. This is the so this is the holy, this is the female energy receiving, right? Preparing to receive. And so just as I talked about the brain perhaps being a fractal of the universe, to me, the female is a fractal of this receiving capacity that had to be there in order to begin the three-dimensional universe. And then when you get to the males, the male energy, which is I just don't have time to go into all this now, but there's another depiction here, and that is let's see if it's here. Okay, well, I do want to point this out because this is something that a lot of people may not be privy to, but there's a professor out of MIT, and he had colleagues around the world that who suggested that that at the Big Bang there was this particular shape to the wave perturbations, the percussive wave as a result of the Big Bang. And the particular perturbation form gave rise to the exact form of the energy and matter in our universe. And that just continued expanding. So he's talking about these percussive waves enabling everything in our three-dimensional universe. And I can get the publications if anybody wants them. But this also comes back to the Abrahamic texts that in the beginning God spoke. And so that's anthropomorphizing. God spoke when, according to these scientists, there was a percussive wave that had these particular perturbations that enabled everything. So I thought that was worth bringing in as a bridge from between science and religion here.
The beginning was heard.
Yeah.
Well, Russ, this has been really fascinating. I suggest we adjourn to the after chat so you can interact with people there. I want to just note that Andrew Bailey corrected me about the Kalahari Bushmen, not the Pygmies. Thank you, Andrew, for that correction. I meant to say Bushmen and misspoke. So I want to thank Andrew for that correction. And then also to note, as Russ is pointing out, there's been a certain mystical aspects of Judeo-Christianity, the Kabbalah principally, Meister Eckhart in the Christian tradition, that have gotten the reality of a unified cosmos more clearly than certainly the Orthodox dimensions have. But I think it's very important for we in the West not to universalize what we think as a global problem. It's a Western problem, not a global problem. The rest of the world has known what Russ and the cosmologists have been saying for thousands of years. And so there's no problem among religion per se, just the Western religious frameworks.
Except that we still have evil across the planet.
Oh, yeah.
So a definition of evil. I mean, what could a definition of evil be? I mean, if what we said will hold water, right? That these hidden dimensions exist and we're a projection of them, and everything is indeed connected. Everyone may have their own definitions or come up with their own definitions, but for me, what is evil is anything that takes us away, that distracts us from the whole. And so even though other religions across the world may have a better understanding, unfortunately we still have evil everywhere. And so that's what has to be dissipated as we strengthen the sense of connection to the unseen.
Totally.
Yep.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much, Russ. You're all welcome to join Russ in the after chat. He's eager to dialogue with you all. And you'll see the link in the chat box. And you also receive the link to the after chat in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk with a gentleman named Thomas Greco on the nature of money and how money is both omnipresent in our world, but coming to a pretty cataclysmic end within the context of civilizational upheaval and change. So that's all of you who have money in your wallet. You may want to tune in for tomorrow's discussion with Thomas Greco on the nature of money. Thank you so much, Russ. This has been fascinating. I love talking astrophysics and cosmology, because this is the container, this is the galactic frame of our world, and these little Planck uh, scales and constants that seem to be at the base of all of it. It's just fascinating.
There's so much juicy stuff we didn't even get into. How humans have developed, this capacity to break out of their corporeal body, how to move beyond that as a result of the most sophisticated part of the brain, and
Yeah,
how that enables free will. There's just so much stuff that we did not get a chance to talk, but maybe some other time.
yeah, we'll have you back again down the trail.
All right, thanks.
Everyone, thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow. Welcome to the After Chat. Bye for now.